guys, Sketchy here, and back with my Crit Happens. I'm going to be continuing the story that I've been telling you guys. So where we last left off, the group had stormed in, and they had cleared a building that they had known was part of the cult. For those that don't remember, which should be anyone if they're remembering this, they've been working against a cult simply known as the Cult of Nihilus. This is all they know right now. All they really know is that it's a cult that is set on ending all life by awakening a dead god. I don't quite remember if I had told them all this yet, but that's generally what's going on. I've mentioned it a few times in my other videos. And this is the story of when they first meet the leader of the cult. This is where it's all going to sort of begin, for the most part. It began a little while ago, but this is where stuff really starts to begin. This is where they actually start taking steps against this. This is where major plot developments are actually going to start beginning. So, after they had cleared out the place, they went around town, and I can't remember the specifics. As I remember, they found out that there is a orc encampment, or there is an encampment of some form, shortly outside the town, and that this is where this is where things have been happening. This is where all of their information is coming from. That this is where they're stationed, at least up here, and I'll get to that later. So they decide, okay, we're gonna get ready. We're gonna get all our stuff together, and we're gonna go out there. They take some time in town. They go to the Mages Guild, and they have a very interesting time talking back and forth with the head mage. And they're finding out stuff. They bring back some bodies that they found in town, and they're bringing all this stuff up. And this is giving them money. This is giving them some extra supplies. At this point, that the group currently consists of the paladin, the scion, the monk, and then a mage. So they have no cleric, which doesn't really affect him. But someone who does come along is a dragonborn by the name of Tauren Victus, who I believe I mentioned earlier, and his involvement is generally a supportive thing. I kind of put him in with the purpose of guiding them. This was sort of his goal, and this is something I'd kind of recommend if you're doing a very story-driven game, is to have someone kind of just point the characters in the right direction. If they have no clue where they're supposed to do or what they're supposed to do next, this person will have some clue. He'll have some advice. And this is basically a way for the DM to help the players without saying, out of character, this is what you're supposed to do, go do it. And that was kind of where my group was at the time. They were all beginner players for the most part. One of them had played before, and another had extensive knowledge, but he didn't know anything about the campaign, so he didn't really know where to go from there. So they eventually did go to the place, and they walk in. There's a couple fights as they get into the dungeon. Nothing major, but further in, they come into a situation that I had not foreseen until I actually looked down at my notes. Because what I did at the time, sorry about that, is I was using a dungeon generator. And the dungeon generator will give you names of monsters, names of traps, all sorts of things that are going to be in this dungeon, as well as the layout of it. And if you're not really good at them, if you're not good at making dungeons, or you're just lazy like I am, they're great tools to use. So the one problem with them is what they put, they don't always match. So for instance, you might have heard me mention there were 6 dwarves in a room before. This was a 4x4 room according to the map. There's no way 6 dwarves are going to fit in this room. So I had to edit it and remove some dwarves, add some things in. And this is going to come up later in this very story. But what had happened is the way the generator had created is it put right off of the first room they enter, there's a little 4x4 room. And inside that 4x4 room is an Ankeg, which is basically this large bug thing. And because it is a large creature, it takes up not 4x4, a 2x2. So there's 4 total blocks. A large creature takes up all of those blocks, and it's not going to fit through the door because there's nowhere for it to go. It can't go into the hallway because the hallway is only 5 feet wide. So I thought, okay, I'm going to mess with the map a little bit, and I'm going to make the room bigger. And maybe they'll decide, oh, I want to go in and fight that thing, and which they thought about doing at first, but no, they had the sort of realistic, sensible dungeoneering mindset of, and almost comical actually when you think about it. Just opens the door, sees a big bug, nope, doesn't want to deal with that, closes the door, walks away. And I was like, okay, you're going to do that. You can do that, that's perfectly fine. I have no problems with that. I had a little bit of a problem with that because I actually wanted them to fight this thing. So what I did, and maybe I shouldn't have done this, but this is kind of what I want to do. I wanted them to have this fight, and I gave them an opportunity to have it without having to have it, so to speak. And basically what it is I had it roll a few times, and it burrowed through the wall. So it ended up in a much larger room, somewhere where they could actually fight it. But at the same time, they had to go through this room, because it went into the entrance room. And so what they were doing is they went through the dungeon, and this is where they had the dwarf encounter. There's 6 dwarves in this room. The lion man rolls his intimidate, and even though he has I believe it's a 3 in charisma, and at that time we were using charisma for his intimidate. He rolled a nat 20, and so I said the dwarves surrender. They aren't going to lay down their arms because you did roll a 16 on your intimidate total. So they aren't going to lay down their arms, but you did kind of, what's the term? You intimidated them. I was trying to think of a fancier term. That's something I do sometimes. So they threw down their arms, and he was like, no, I want them to throw down. They don't throw down their arms, but he's like, I want them to throw down their arms. And he rolls again, and he hits a nat 20. Again, so it's 2 nat 20s in a row, and they just immediately start throwing everything they have at him. And I know I've told the story before, but it's one of those stories that I find so hilarious that I want to tell it every time. Because in comes Luna, our local nuke, the Scion, and she tries to roll her intimidate as well. There's no need for her to do this, but she decides she wants to, so she rolls her dice. I'll let her, and she rolls a 1. And this enrages them. They're like, "Oh, we can take them. Why are we scared of them?" The 8-foot-tall lion man is a good reason to be afraid. But there's a little girl there. We can take them. By little girl, I mean she's 5 foot tall. She's almost as tall. The dwarves are almost as tall as her. So the fight starts, and they're basically fighting 5 or 6 naked, unarmed dwarves, which is kind of a funny situation to be in. This does start a problem with the mage. As I mentioned before, he was a player who had some experience with the game. However, he was a bit of a rules lawyer, or a rules Nazi. I'd almost refer to him as the latter because he didn't like letting things budge. If it was in the rules, this is how it's supposed to be to him. And that's not the way I ran it, things. So he would argue with me a little bit. He was good enough to know that he isn't the DM, so I make the rules, he doesn't. But at the same time, it was one of those things where if you don't understand or don't agree with the the rules, and I've probably gone over this multiple times. But if you don't understand the way the rules are being used or you don't agree with them, you just say, okay, that's fine, we'll just play it out, and then I'll talk to you later about it, and if it's something so astronomically bad that I can't deal with it, we'll try working something out, or you have to go. So what ended up happening is we go further in the dungeon, and it's so long of a dungeon that they had to take a break. We actually had to end the session for the night in the middle of the dungeon. When we come back next week, the mage's player could not show up. For one reason or another, he just couldn't show up. Because I think he still intended to play, he just wasn't there at the time. So I made this explanation that, while you guys were resting, you were foolish enough to not post guards. And he wandered out. I think that's actually what happened. No, that's what happened. He wandered apart from the group, and then he left early. So I said, his character got kidnapped. And he wasn't there the next day, or the next session. So his character was basically out for a session and a half, and I basically explained it. He got captured in the dungeon. So the group finally works their way to the very end, and they come into a room, and it's very out of place for a dungeon. They got a desk. It looks like someone's living quarters. It's decent sized, and behind it is a man garbed all in black, white hair, and he greets them. Well, welcome to my residence. I know who you are, and it'd be best if you know who I am. And my name is Vex. And this is the big bad guy of the campaign. And he basically explains to them that they're interfering with his plans, they're making things difficult for him, and that really upsets him. But he goes a little more in detail with his plans. He explains, I believe that he offered them to work with him, but he basically explains that in his mind, and in the cult's mind in general, he's the leader of the cult, so everything comes from him, that the world is completely irredeemable. There's so many corrupt people, there's so much crime, almost a typical fantasy story, except he's not doing it as a good thing. The fantasy story I'm referencing is where the bad guy thinks it's best to destroy the world because that'll end all suffering. No, he's just basically seeing the world is shit. Everyone on it is a criminal, everyone is corrupt, and it needs to be purged and start over. So I guess it's typical in that way, because I've seen plenty of those. And I'm really proud of myself when I made this character, because mainly for this one instance, and it's because during this conversation, someone mentioned what about the innocents? Do you think they should die too? And he just laughs. What innocence? No one is innocent. And right from there, at least one of the players immediately, this person needs to die right now. And that was Vea's character. She just hated this kind of person. The person who thinks that the nihilistic kind of person, which kind of fit perfectly, because the cult of nihilists, I came up from a completely different location. I didn't have this character's personality in mind. And originally I was trying to play him off as sort of this Pagan Min kind of character, because I had recently played Far Cry 4. And Pagan Min was this really interesting character, this really charismatic, but just below the surface was something very deep and evil. And that was something I really liked. And that was something I wanted to bring out in this character. And it's something I have brought out later on in this character, where he slowly devolved from this very calm, very collected, I'm going to make things happen. You're going to see it happen. I am going to win. Almost like a calmer, less crazy Handsome Jack almost, who he legitimately thinks that he is the good guy. What he's he's like, there's going to be sacrifices, but there must be sacrifices to be made. He's going to make the world a better place by destroying life, because the things that are currently here are bad. That's kind of his mindset. And my players will probably counter me on this. They might say that he has a different personality than what I'm thinking in my mind. And that all comes down to my portrayal of him. Because I have this idea, and then I have how I portray it. And there's two different ways to do that. But that's a side note. So after this, they have a bit of a fight, because he's essentially said, okay, I'd like you to join me, because I see you are great warriors. I want you on my side. They automatically refuse. Why wouldn't they? He tried to sacrifice them a few days ago. Ironically, Arbogast has since become a his god is now he now worships Nihilus, because he has met a god. So he's like, I know he's there. I've met him. I've had a conversation with him. So I'm going to follow him. He doesn't believe that the world needs to end, because I've made it so that the story, Nihilus doesn't really want to be awoken. He doesn't want to deal with the world right now. He just wants to tend to the void. But they go on from there, and they have this fight. And it's a very brief fight, because I essentially make it clear to them that they have no chance of beating him. And this is something that I've done multiple times. Just this really powerful character who you're going to have to work your way up to beat him. You cannot beat him now. But he doesn't want to kill you for one reason. He doesn't want to kill you right now for one reason or another. He wants it to be the right time, which may be coming up. So they have this fight. He makes it very clear that they can't be beat him. He throws them all against the wall with his special abilities. And he says, "You've upset me. I don't care what you think or what you believe. I am going through with my plans. Now leave." And they quickly take this as he is letting you live. He could have very easily killed them at that point, because they were, I think, level 3 or 4 characters, and he was a level 10. So while it is possible, it's well within the realms of possibility, as in their level 8s taking down CR10 creatures on a regular basis. They were going to have a very hard time, because that much of a level gap is not going to work, especially with a low-level mage, because mages aren't very powerful at the low levels. So they leave, and as they're leaving, I think it's as they're leaving at least. As they're leaving, or at some point they had worked their way back through this room, the Ankeg has worked its way out, and they ran into it. So they fight it, and they quickly realize just the kind of situation they're in, because the fighter that I had paired with them takes a massive hit, and it almost drops him in one hit. I think it did 20 damage, and he was just lucky enough to have more than that. But they quickly realized this is not a creature that should be taken lightly. So they play it out very carefully. They have a very good fight. They take it down with very few casualties. I think it's not a very difficult creature to begin with, but just the sheer amount of damage it could dish out. It could have one-shot Vea. It could have probably one-shot Arbogast. It probably wasn't going to one-shot the Paladin, but because he's a Paladin. So they eventually take this thing down, and they get out the dungeon, and they now have an immense amount of information. They know where they're going. They know what to do next, sort of. They know they need to stop this cult because it's bad. It's going to end all life, theoretically, and that's not something they want to even allow to happen. So they go back to their tavern, and they start working it out. And that's where I'm going to end for today. They've come to a point where the main story is starting to open up to them. They're knowing more information, and they have met the big bad of the game. Someone who to this day, they still haven't beaten. This is a group that's been running for 2 years. Oh, no, not 2 years. A year and a half now. And I've given them a couple chances. I'm not going to let them win, though. So the goal, at least on my side, is to give them a really memorable enemy and a really memorable fight at the end of this campaign, or whenever they do fight him. And I want them to have a reason. I want them to have purpose, direction, motivation are basically the things. What are they doing? Why are they doing it? And what is the greater effect of it? Or why they should want to do this? Because there's go kill the guy. That's the direction. Purpose, to stop him from ending the world. And the motivation is inborn, is personal to a lot of them at this point. The Paladin has had his city sacked by them, which I'll cover later. I covered a little bit. I'll go more in depth later. The Scion just hates this guy with a burning passion, hates his personality. And the monk has had a hole put through his chest. They all want to kill this guy, which is good. That's what I like. So, I'll be ending it here today, guys. If you have any suggestions for me, that'd be greatly appreciated. Thank you for watching. Leave me something. Leave me leave me a thumb up, down. Give me a comment. I greatly appreciate any advice you guys have for my videos or anything you might want to add. So until later, guys, game on.